The dust on our Iowa farm never truly settled. It hung in the air like a ghost, a perpetual reminder of long days and hard work under the unforgiving sun. The late afternoon light, a hazy golden sheet, filtered through the fine particles, casting long, distorted shadows of the tractor and the two of us. At 17, I was my father's right-hand man, a natural with the massive John Deere, or so he always said. The engine's low hum was a familiar comfort, a rhythmic beat against the silence of the endless fields. We were focused on a particularly tough patch of soil, where the clay was stubborn and unforgiving. I was walking alongside, my boots sinking slightly into the freshly tilled earth, helping to guide the plow through the resistant ground. My father, John, abruptly cut the engine's roar. The sudden silence was jarring. "Son," he said, his voice unusually low, almost a whisper against the vast open space, "let me show you something." He pointed with a gloved hand to a small, almost invisible rock embedded in the path directly in front of me. As I leaned down to examine it, my concentration focused entirely on the small obstruction. I felt a sharp, deliberate push in my back. It was not a stumble or a misstep. It was a firm, two-handed shove. My legs tangled and I stumbled, falling directly into the path of the tractor wheel. The world dissolved into a deafening roar as the engine revved back to life. My head snapped up. I expected to see panic on my father's face, a look of horror, but his expression was chillingly calm. It was a look of grim satisfaction, a flicker of cold relief, as if a long-held plan was finally coming to fruition. The tractor shuddered to a halt as the wheel rolled right over my left leg. The initial shock was a cold, numbing sensation, not pain. It was a moment of surreal detachment. My mother, Sarah, came running from the farmhouse, her face a carefully constructed mask of panic. "Oh my God, Michael!" she shrieked, her voice too loud, too rehearsed for the quiet tragedy. As she knelt beside me, her eyes met my father's over my crumpled form, and in that fleeting, terrifying moment, I saw a silent, cold understanding pass between them, a look of conspiracy. That's when the pain exploded, a white-hot agony that stole my breath and vision. It wasn't just a broken bone. It was the violent shattering of a reality I had always trusted. My parents, my foundation, had just let me fall. The last thing I heard before the darkness took me was my mother whispering to my father, "The insurance will pay for everything." If you want to follow Michael's story and see how he rebuilds his life after this shocking betrayal, make sure to subscribe to the channel. The hospital room was a world of sterile white and the persistent medicinal smell of antiseptic. I drifted in and out of a haze of pain and medication, the dull, throbbing ache in my leg a constant companion. The rhythmic beeping of the IV pump and the distant murmur of voices were the soundtrack to my new reality. Doctors and nurses moved in a blur, their faces a mix of professional concern and subdued awe. They called me a miracle, a tough farm kid who had survived a crush injury that should have been far worse. My parents maintained their act flawlessly, playing the part of concerned, heartbroken guardians. My mother sat by my bed, her hand resting on mine, its touch feeling foreign and cold, a dead weight. She would speak in hushed, comforting tones about my bravery and how blessed we were that I had survived. The words were a thin veneer over the truth I had already glimpsed, but I was never truly fooled. When they thought I was asleep or lost in a painkiller fog, the facade would crack, revealing a different, terrifying reality. One night, the nurse left the door slightly ajar. I was more lucid than they knew. I heard their voices from the hallway, low and conspiratorial, the words carrying a cruel, calculated weight. "The doctor said he'll be fine, Sarah," my father said, his voice sounding tired and defeated. "It's just a long recovery." "Fine? That's not the point, John." My mother's voice cut through the silence, sharp with a cold frustration that sent a shiver down my spine. "He's alive. The policy has a clause for permanent disability, not just death. We won't get the full amount." My stomach clenched, a sickening realization taking hold. My whole body felt heavy, cold. It was all true. The push, the fake tears, the entire horrific act. It was all for money. They had planned my death. My mother's casual dismissal of my life, her focus on the full amount, was a spiritual blow far more unbearable than the physical agony in my leg. My heart broke, not with a sudden crack, but with a slow, agonizing crumble. I understood in that moment that their love for me was nothing more than a transaction, and I was the commodity. I was a broken boy, betrayed by the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, trapped in a sterile room, listening to them mourn a profit they hadn't made. My grandfather, a man as weathered and unyielding as the ancient oak trees on our property, came to the hospital. He was my father's father, a stoic man of few words, but we shared an unspoken bond that transcended generations. He sat by my bedside, his gnarled hands resting on the bedrail, and simply watched me with eyes that held a lifetime of unspoken wisdom and sorrow. He didn't offer false platitudes or empty reassurances like my parents. He saw the truth in my eyes, the deep spiritual wound that no medicine could heal. He saw the betrayal. When my parents stepped out of the room to consult with a doctor, he leaned in, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that was a part of the land itself. "I know," he whispered. "You know what, Grandpa?" I asked, my voice barely audible, the words feeling like shards of glass. "I know what they did," he replied, his gaze unwavering, full of a heartbreaking sadness. "Your mother has always been obsessed with money. And your father, he's a good man, but he's weak when it comes to her." He then revealed a detail that twisted the knife of betrayal. They had taken out a large life insurance policy on me just a few months prior, on my 18th birthday. It had been presented as a celebratory gift. "They told me it was a gift," he explained. "Protection for your future. I thought it was strange, but I never imagined this." The policy, he explained, was substantial, and he had learned of it by chance. The timing, the amount, it was all too convenient. "This wasn't a spontaneous act of desperation, Michael," he said, the truth of his words a heavy weight in the room. "It was a calculated, premeditated plan." I felt a new wave of nausea wash over me. They hadn't waited for me to be of legal age, but had used my birthday as an opportunity to turn me into an asset, a walking trust fund, a disposable commodity. My grandfather squeezed my hand, his grip firm and grounding. "We'll figure this out, son. But first you have to heal, your body and your soul." He was the only person who saw beyond my broken leg. He saw the shattered trust, and he vowed to help me mend it. The weeks that followed were a blur of physical therapy and a quiet, simmering rage that burned beneath my skin. Every time my parents visited, their feigned concern felt like an insult, a cruel joke. I had to fight the urge to scream, to lash out at their hypocrisy, to tear down the flimsy facade they had constructed. The physical therapist, a kind and patient woman named Maria, became my unexpected anchor. She helped me relearn how to walk, a painstaking and frustrating process that felt like an impossible mountain to climb. The pain was excruciating, the progress agonizingly slow. I hated the slowness, the pain, and the feeling of being a helpless child again. "It's not about being strong, Michael," she would say gently, her voice a soothing balm. "It's about being stubborn. The pain will pass. The strength will come back. You just have to push through it, one step at a time." She taught me that the anger and resentment I was holding on to were a heavy weight, a poison I was inflicting on myself. My grandfather came every day, bringing me books, news from the farm, and silent companionship. He'd talk about the weather, the crops, anything but the accident, giving me the space I needed to process everything. One afternoon, he brought an old photo album. It was filled with pictures of my father as a boy, a mischievous smile on his face, his eyes full of life and a love for the land. "He wasn't always like this," my grandfather said, his voice thick with emotion. "He used to have a spark, a genuine love for this land. Your mother changed him. Her dreams of a bigger, more extravagant life were too much for him." I saw the truth in his words. My father's weakness wasn't a character flaw. It was a consequence of a slow and insidious erosion of his spirit by a woman who valued profit over people. I began to understand that my parents weren't just evil. They were broken. And with that understanding, my blind, furious rage began to transform into a more complex, unsettling sadness. It was no longer just about the betrayal. It was about the tragedy of what they had lost and what they had done to me in the process. If you want to know what happens to Michael and his family, and to find out if he chooses to forgive, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I was finally back home, navigating the familiar spaces on a pair of crutches. The scent of my mother's cooking, once a source of comfort, now felt like a suffocating shroud of deceit. A thick, suffocating tension hung in the air between the three of us. We moved through the house like strangers, our interactions stilted and unnatural. My father, John, avoided my gaze, his shoulders perpetually slumped as he sat at the kitchen table, a newspaper acting as a shield. My mother, Sarah, was overly cheerful, her voice a brittle chime as she asked if I wanted more food, if my leg was bothering me. The pretense was unbearable. The silence was louder than any words. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I couldn't hold it in any longer. The carefully constructed peace shattered. I dropped my fork with a clatter. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling but firm. My father looked up, startled, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and recognition. "Why what, son?" he stammered, his eyes darting to my mother. "Why did you do it?" I said, my voice rising, the words finally tumbling out in a torrent of pain and accusation. "The tractor, the insurance money. Why did you let me fall?" My mother froze, the forced smile on her face evaporating instantly, replaced by a mask of cold fury. My father's head dropped into his hands, his body shaking with silent sobs. "It was your mother's idea," he mumbled, his voice muffled by his hands, the ultimate betrayal. "She said we needed the money for the farm for a better life. She said it was the only way." My mother shot him a venomous glare, her eyes narrowed to slits. "Don't you dare put this all on me, John. You pushed him. You pushed our son. You're just as much to blame as I am." The fight I had secretly dreaded, the one I had needed to happen, was finally here. The raw, ugly truth was finally being brought into the light, tearing apart the family unit piece by piece. My father, cornered and broken, finally confessed everything. He told me about the crushing farm debts, the years of quiet desperation, and my mother's relentless pressure to think big. The drought-plagued seasons, the failed crops, the bank loans that had spiraled out of control. The insurance policy was her plan, a desperate final solution to their financial ruin. He admitted that he had hesitated, but her constant manipulation and his own feelings of failure had slowly worn him down until he finally gave in. "I never wanted to hurt you, Michael," he sobbed, his face a mask of shame and anguish, the years of quiet suffering now pouring out in a flood of tears. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." His confession was a bitter pill to swallow. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a confirmation of his profound weakness, his inability to stand up to my mother. It was a man losing his soul for a woman who didn't even love him. My mother, Sarah, remained defiant, her face a hard mask of self-pity and anger. "It was a mistake," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, as if talking about a failed business deal. "But we were desperate. We did it for all of us. You would have had a trust fund, a life of comfort. You'll thank us one day." Her words were hollow, a pathetic attempt to justify a monstrous act, revealing a moral bankruptcy that chilled me to the bone. I looked at her then, truly saw her, and realized she was a woman consumed by greed, a black hole of ambition that would never be filled. The mother I had known, the woman who had tucked me into bed and kissed my forehead, was gone. She was a stranger. My grandfather, who had quietly entered the room, placed a hand on my father's shoulder. "Go," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "This is not a conversation for a broken man and his son. Go." I limped out of the room, leaving the remnants of my shattered family behind, a new and powerful resolve hardening within me. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. The following day, with my grandfather's help, I moved into his small, rustic home on the edge of the property. The air was cleaner there, the silence more peaceful. He didn't ask me what I was going to do, he simply gave me space to breathe. The house was simple, filled with the scent of old books, fresh brewed coffee, and the faint, comforting smell of pipe tobacco. It was a sanctuary from the chaos of the farmhouse. I spent my days walking with a single crutch, the phantom ache in my leg a constant but less painful reminder of the past. My physical therapist, Maria, continued our sessions, and she was the one who finally helped me understand the true nature of forgiveness, not as a gift for them, but as a gift to myself. Holding on to that anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, she said softly one day. It's not about letting them off the hook. It's about setting yourself free. It's about letting go of the rage that will consume you whole if you let it. I started spending time in the old workshop behind my grandfather's house, a place filled with the history of his hands and the comforting scent of sawdust. I began whittling, a process that felt both simple and profound. I created small sculptures from forgotten scraps of wood, shaping rough, gnarled pieces into smooth, elegant forms. It was a slow, meditative process. With each cut, each stroke of the knife, I felt a piece of the emotional burden lifting. I was creating something beautiful from something broken, a poignant metaphor for my own life. I realized I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to see my parents suffer. I just wanted to be free of them, to build a life on my own terms, with my own hands. My focus shifted from the pain of the past to the promise of the future. The farm, the land, it still called to me, but now it was a place of my own choosing, not a place of chains. If you want to see how Michael forges his own path and what happens to his family, make sure to subscribe to the channel. One quiet afternoon, about a month after the move, my father appeared at my grandfather's house. He looked older than his years, his face etched with a profound guilt I had never seen before. He stood on the porch, his hands in his pockets, and a heavy silence settled between us. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken words. "I lost the farm," he said, his voice a broken whisper, his eyes fixed on the distant fields. "Your mother took the insurance money and left. She said it wasn't enough, that it was all a waste. She's gone, Michael." I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The woman who had been the source of so much pain was gone, but the man who was my father was left with nothing, a hollow shell of his former self. I looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a villain but as a deeply flawed and broken man, a victim in his own way of my mother's ambition. I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I just gestured for him to come in. We sat on the porch, 2 generations of silent, broken men looking out at the endless fields. For the first time, we talked not as father and son in a position of power and pain, but as 2 men who had both been through a terrible fire. He told me about the crushing weight of his wife's ambitions, the years of feeling like a failure, and his final, terrible decision. The words came out slowly, painfully, each one a stone of regret. I didn't say, "I forgive you." The words felt too big, too premature, too final. But I listened. I heard his pain. And in that listening, in the simple act of being there for him, something shifted. I wasn't ready to forgive, not completely, but I was ready to heal. I was ready to acknowledge his humanity and my own. The old farm, now legally owned by the bank, was put up for sale. The community, who had always known the truth about my mother's insatiable ambition and my father's quiet desperation, rallied around me. They knew, not from my words, but from the raw public shame etched on my father's face. He was a man humbled, his reputation shattered. My grandfather and I, with the help of a few friends and neighbors who believed in us, managed to secure a loan. It was a community loan, a collective act of faith. We bought the property back. It was no longer the old family farm. It was a new beginning. My father stayed working alongside us, but his role was different now. He was a farmhand, a helper, a man rebuilding his life one day at a time, finding his redemption in the soil. He worked harder than anyone, as if trying to physically outpace his guilt. The old tractor that had almost ended my life sat in the barn, a silent sentinel I couldn't bring myself to touch. The sight of it brought a cold dread to my stomach. Instead, I saved up and bought a new one, a shiny green machine that felt like a fresh start, a clean slate. The sun on the fields, the smell of the tilled soil, it was all the same, but my perspective had changed. This wasn't a place of betrayal anymore. It was a place of my own making, built on hard work, a gradual forgiveness, and the promise of a future I had chosen for myself. The earth felt different under my feet, not a foundation for a lie, but a place to plant a new, honest seed. 2 years passed. The farm flourished, and I felt a deep sense of pride in what we had built. My leg, while still aching on cold, damp days, was strong again. It was a part of my story, not a burden. My father was a changed man, his quiet gratitude a constant presence. He never spoke of my mother or the accident again. It was a wound that had healed, but left a permanent scar. He was slowly finding his way back to himself, to the man my grandfather had told me about. My grandfather, now older and frailer, would sit on the porch, a quiet smile on his face, watching us work. He had saved me, not just from the accident, but from a life consumed by bitterness and hatred. I stood in the fields, the scent of the ripe corn heavy in the air. The harvest was ready. It was a long journey from that day under the tractor wheel. I hadn't sought revenge, I had sought peace. I hadn't forgiven them in the clean, simple way people talk about, where all is forgotten and everything returns to normal. I had forgiven the past for what it was, for what it had taught me. It had shown me the fragility of trust, the immense strength of the human spirit, and the power of finding support in the most unexpected places. The field was not just a field, it was a testament to my survival. It was a monument to the fact that even when the ground gives way beneath you, you can still rise and plant new seeds for a new life. The sun set, painting the sky in fiery orange and deep violet, and I felt a profound sense of peace. I was home, and I was finally free. And that is the end of Michael's story. If you were moved by his journey of healing and hope, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next story.